This is the engine-driven vacuum pump used on 1980 to 1985 Mercedes 4 and 5-cylinder diesel engines. And this is becoming a problem for owners of these popular cars. And the primary reason is, of course, these aren't available new anymore, and rebuild kits are not available anywhere in the world. So we're getting a lot of emails from people saying, well, I've got a problem with my vacuum pump, what do I do? Where do I find one? And your best bet now is try to find a used one, but you have no guarantee a used one is going to work for you. So what I want to do in this video is talk about the problems you might have with these and what are some of the solutions to fix some of the more common problems. The first, of course, is major mechanical failure. You can see on the back side here, there's a big spring and a pumping mechanism, and here is a roller bearing, and sometimes this just disintegrates. If you're getting a loud clanking noise on the front of your old diesel engine and you've lost vacuum, this is something you definitely want to check out. Now what I'm going to do is take the lid off of this now and show you the other common problems that you may run into if you own one of these cars. If you haven't seen the inside of one of these vacuum pumps before, I think you'll find this interesting. You pull the lid off, you're going to see this piston assembly right here, but you're also going to see 1, 2, 3 check valves. 3 check valves, that's a lot of check valves. You're probably saying to yourself, but that's not all. There's a 4th check valve right here. Now when this one goes bad, you're going to lose almost all your vacuum. It's going to be really kind of catastrophic. You'll wonder why your brakes have failed, why your engine won't shut off, why your door locks won't work. One of the first things you want to do is check this check valve. If you look down in there and don't see anything, it's just a hollow hole. It probably swallowed the valving mechanism. You might want to take the cap off and check it. So the check valves are critical to this thing producing vacuum. Now there is an O-ring on this piston along with a sealing ring, and that's very important too, but I found that that's very robust. Unless you see a lot of scoring on the side wall here, that may still work. It may not be perfect. There are no replacements for that sealing ring or that big O-ring down in here. But I have been able to come up with a kit to replace these 4 check valves. When the check valves fail, particularly this one, you're going to get a real big loss of vacuum. Now with everything plugged off, no potential leaks, you put a vacuum gauge on this, you should probably be getting anywhere from 20 to 22 inches of vacuum. If you're not, then something's wrong. Now don't test for vacuum with everything hooked up, because if you have a leak in your brake booster, or if you have a leak in your door locks, or if you have a leak in your engine shutoff valve, you won't get full vacuum readings if you have a vacuum gauge hooked up to this while it's plugged into other components that are leaking. I hope you follow me there. So you need to make sure when you're testing this that everything else is plugged off. Testing your vacuum pump output before you panic. It's really important. There's no other way you're going to have to do this with a vacuum gauge and the proper test procedures to determine how well your vacuum pump is functioning. Now, I know this is probably a little scary if you've never done this before, if you haven't tested a diesel vacuum pump. So I came up with this kit. It's called our Diesel Healthy Vacuum Kit, and it includes the manual I wrote on testing the vacuum system on these old diesels, and you're going to get a correct vacuum gauge and some hoses, because there's a couple different ways you can attach this. Plus, if you look over here, I've got some golf tees, I've got a plug here, so you can plug off those items that you think may be leaking. Remember I said you have to isolate the pump from all other systems to get an accurate test. That explains that procedure more thoroughly in this manual, and these are the things you're going to need if you're going to seriously do some vacuum system testing on your old diesel. And I'll put some links in the show more below this video. Okay, let's talk about these check valves. The first warning is, of course, orientation of these valves. If you're pulling the lid off your pump, and you can do this with the pump still on the engine, you need to pay very close attention to the direction. You have this one pointing up, these two pointing down. So it's very important that the orientation of these check valves stay just like this. Take a mental picture, or you can always refer back to this video. And I found when these check valves fail, they don't fail completely. They start to wear out, they lose some of their spring tension, they get gunk and crud inside, and you'll get fluctuations. You'll get fluctuations in the vacuum as long as this main check valve is still good. The other thing is you're going to start getting oil up in your vacuum lines. You'll get oil right up into the booster line. You'll get oil running down to the check valve for the door locks. You'll pull those vacuum lines off everywhere in your engine compartment and say, why is all this oil in those vacuum lines? Well, that's because these 3 check valves aren't functioning properly, and you have enough wear on this sealing ring that it's pumping oil. So if you have an old pump, you may have to clean and service this periodically unless you can find a good replacement, because like I said, there's no replacement for that, what I call piston ring assembly down inside here. So if you have good sealing check valves, that usually prevents the oil from getting up into your vacuum line. So that's a good indication. Fluctuating vacuum and oil in your lines probably means there's something wrong, or these 3 check valves are not sealing properly. And it's not just the check valve. You have underneath each check valve a sealing ring down in there. Now those get old, they get hard, and they lose their seal. So you'll start to get leaks by this rubber O-ring. Now this is a really weird O-ring. It's square, and these aren't available, so I've had to resource some creative replacements, which I'll show you in a little bit. But the kit will come with the 3 check valves. You'll have the option to get the main check valve, and I'm going to give you some options for replacing these seals right here. Now, if this seal is still soft and squishy, you may not need to replace it. And the best way to tell if that's true is if you put the cap down on here, it should be touching and pushing down on that. And if you look here, see, there's nothing there. It's just pushing on the O-ring. That's another problem. We do not have replacement weird O-rings that fit on the top. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the things you can do if your O-ring is bad. But right now, I'm going to show you one of the options I came up with for replacing this sealing ring right here if yours are no good. Now I'm going to demonstrate what bad seals look like. Now you recall this is a fairly new pump. It was removed about 10 years ago. And it only been on a car a very short time. And those seals don't look too bad. You know, they're still soft. So I'm going to take and remove this large O-ring. And then I'm going to take the cover plate, and let's see how much pressure we get. You should get a little bit of pressure pushing back against the plate if those seals are still okay. Look at that, nothing, see? This is just metal on metal, and there is no resistance. So that means you're not going to get a full seal on these old original seals. That's why I've come up with some alternatives in my kit. Unfortunately, I can't find one sealed that will do the job that's thick enough, but I found 2. We have a round O-ring and a flat ring here. Now I'm going to take these out, and then I'll remove the original seals. You can see they kind of look okay, but what happens is they get kind of squished over time. And you can see there's oil around in this area here too, which indicates that they've probably been leaking oil by these sealing rings. You take the round one, install it first, and then the flat one. And then we'll install a check valve. Now I think you can see already that check valve is sitting up a little bit. See, it's just sitting up a little bit. Now you can't have it too high. If you have it too high, the screw pressure won't push it down, but you do have 3 screws here and 2 screws here to help you really pull that plate down tight on those new seals. Okay, look at the difference here. See that? You have just a slight gap, very slight gap there, and you can feel that's tight. So I will put these screws in, and let's see if we can pull that down so there is no gap. I'm not going to torque them. I'm just going to snug them down in tight so we can see whether or not that's going to collapse those 2 O-rings enough to give you a very tight seal on the check valves. Okay, look at that. You can feel it going down. You can actually feel it squeezing down against those new O-rings. And see, I don't have to over torque this. And then you can see right there the gap is gone. So that's how you check. If you pull this apart and you want to look at your old square O-rings in there, see if they're okay, this is how you do it. And most of the time, more often than not, they're not okay. And they will leak. In my kit, I can offer you these 3 new check valves and these 6 seals. And that's going to solve your check valve function and check valve leak problems on the upper part of this vacuum pump. But I know some of you are saying, well, Kent, what about this? Now, fortunately, let's see if we can get this out of here. Mine is okay. It's still soft. It hasn't hardened. But more often than not, you'll pull these out. They're going to be squished kind of flat, and they're going to be hard. And there are no replacements. I don't even know how I would make that. I thought about trying to get 1 big O-ring and 3 smaller ones. Maybe I will try something like that in the future. But the only thing you can do, short of trying to find someone that's selling one of these used, which is very rare, is to put a little sealant on this. And I want to warn you right away, do not use, I'm going to repeat, do not use any type of silicone RTV sealant. I hate that stuff. And it gets in the engine, it falls off, it doesn't hold up well to oil and gas. And I'll show you why. Look at someone install this on the engine with RTV, and look at this RTV peeling off. Where do you think that goes when it falls off? Look at this. It's like worms. I've actually seen this get into climate control systems through the cooling system. I've seen it plug bearing passages. So do not use any type of RTV on this gasket, and particularly if you're going to try something on this seal, you don't want it. You just don't want a silicone-based sealant. I prefer to use the Aviation Permatex, and we will include some of this in the kit. You can put a small amount in the groove around here and then coat this very lightly. Don't put too much on because you don't want it to get down in the piston, and you don't want to get it on or in your check valves. That's the only solution I have for this seal right here. I wanted to show you this up close and explain why I said I don't need to worry about this particular big O-ring seal. It's still okay. And the way you can tell is to put the lid down on there and see if it's holding it off a little bit. So you can see a little bit of compression there. And if you put your lid on with that sealing ring in place and there's no compression, then you're going to probably need to use a slight amount of Aviation Permatex or it's going to leak. Now I want to address another problem that you may run into when you're working on these old vacuum pumps, and that's getting it off the engine. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 small hex head, that's 5mm hex head bolts that hold this to the engine block. And you would think these would be just easy to come out, right? I don't know. I don't know if they use an impact at the factory to put those in. but they are really in there. I think it's a lot to do with the heat and expansion, contraction of dissimilar metals over time. They get really stuck in there. And what happens, you'll get a wrench on them and you'll round them out, and then you go, oh no, how do I get them out? So we decided to come up with a solution. Let me show you. This is a good bolt right here. This is a good wrench. I know some people say, well, you buy German wrenches, you know, they're going to, no, the German wrenches will still have a little bit of slop. It's just the nature of the beast. It's the bolt that's the problem. It's not the wrench. The bolts are made out of softer steel, and for some reason they're all sloppy. Watch this. I'm going to put this wrench in an original bolt. Now I'm going to hold it with this vice grip so you can see. Look at the movement. You have close to an inch of movement there in that bolt head. And all it takes is a little extra, too much torque, and that's going to round out. And then you're going to have a big wrench dance. You know, it's possible to get in there, try to get on some of these with vice grips. You can use a drill, but some of them you can't get the drill on to drill the heads out. And it just becomes a big wrench dance. So Trish and I got together, decided to provide a special wrench in our kit. This is a modified 5mm. You see it's got a ball socket on one end, but watch. This goes in real hard, and we actually recommend that you tap it in. Okay, look at that. No movement at all. So this is going to help you get those bolts out of your vacuum pump. You don't need to use this wrench to install them because you're not applying that much torque. But there's another thing, you know, I got to work this out to get it out of there. Another thing that's really important before you ever stick a wrench on any of these hex head bolts is you want to go in there with a little pick tool and you want to scrape all the junk and oil and crud in there, because if you don't do that, the wrench doesn't go all the way down in there, and that makes it much easier to round out those heads. So we're going to provide this special wrench for you. You can get them loose on this end. Once they're loose, you can use this ball socket end to come in an angle and just spin these out by hand. The trick is just breaking them loose. That's what's critical. Now, you can use a small piece of pipe. If you want to get a little extra torque, you can also grab these with a vice grip to give you a little bit of extra torque, and that's okay because you now have a wrench that's fitting very tight in the head. So we'll go ahead and give you new bolts in the kit with washers. So if you do damage any of your original bolts taking them out, you'll have new bolts to be able to replace the damaged ones. And isn't that cool? To summarize, this is what will be included in my kit. I'm going to call it the single hole vacuum pump partial overhaul kit. This is only for partial overhaul. You've already seen the items I can't provide and some of the other problems that may crop up. But if you suspect your vacuum pump is suffering from loss of vacuum due to check valve issues and leaks, this is the kit for you. I would recommend, if you have one of these pumps, that you pick up a kit for the future. If you plan to keep the car on these 80 to 85 diesel engines, these parts may not be available very much longer. Okay, I'm just warning you. And you'll get the 3 check valves, the 6 O-rings. You'll get 6 stainless steel bolts with wave washers, 2 Aviation Permatex, the modified Allen wrench, and a brand new gasket. On this gasket also, you're going to use the Aviation Permatex, no RTV allowed. Now there's one other thing I'm going to offer, and that's this main check valve, but I'm not going to include it in the kit because some of you have already purchased this or don't need it, and this is becoming a very expensive part. This also may not be available too much longer into the future. I do plan to continue to offer this main check valve as long as it's still available and it can be purchased separately. So if you're interested in doing some service work on your vacuum pump, or you want to keep it going into the future, I'm going to put some links below this video that'll take you right to this kit on my website.